I had never been the type of man who went looking for trouble, but for some reason, trouble always seemed to find me, and moving into a neighborhood with an HOA turned out to be the biggest mistake of my life. When my wife, Jenna, and I bought this house 2 years ago, we thought we were stepping into the picture-perfect suburban dream: quiet streets, manicured lawns, friendly neighbors waving as they walked their dogs. I had just been promoted to project manager at my construction firm, and we wanted a place where we could raise our daughter, Lila, who was 3 at the time, in a safe environment. At first, everything seemed great. But then came Karen. Everyone in the neighborhood called her HOA Karen, behind her back, some even to her face, because she was the president of the HOA and made it her life's mission to control every blade of grass, every porch light, every paint color in the neighborhood. She was relentless, the kind of person who would measure the height of your grass with a ruler and send you a violation notice if it was half an inch too long. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself it wasn't worth the energy to get angry about little warnings about trash cans being out for too many hours, or a fine for having my truck parked in my own driveway instead of in the garage overnight. But over time, Karen made it personal. It started with little things: snide comments when Jenna planted roses instead of the HOA-approved tulips, rude notes left on our door if a toy was left in the yard, her coming by unannounced to inspect the property like she owned the place. I tolerated it for months, thinking if I stayed polite, maybe she'd get bored and move on to harassing someone else. But then, one day, a letter arrived in the mail that changed everything. It wasn't an ordinary violation notice. It was a final warning, claiming we owed $7,500 in fines and late fees for a series of alleged violations, most of which were completely fabricated. According to Karen, we had broken multiple rules: wrong trash bins, unapproved landscaping, unauthorized gatherings, which was actually just Lila's birthday party, and even a claim that my truck was commercial equipment, not allowed to be parked on the property. It was insane. I went to the next HOA meeting to fight it, but Karen shut me down before I could even finish my sentence, telling me, rules are rules. If you can't follow them, maybe this isn't the neighborhood for you. I tried appealing through the proper channels, sending certified letters, even calling the property management company that supposedly oversaw the HOA, but everything led back to Karen. The more I pushed back, the worse it got. She began targeting us specifically. When I built a small treehouse for Lila in the backyard, she sent a violation notice saying it was an unauthorized structure. When I left for a work trip and came back, I found a final notice taped to my door threatening legal action if I didn't remove it. I tore it down and told Jenna not to worry, that there was no way an HOA could just take our home over something so small. I had no idea that Karen was about to escalate things far beyond petty fines and warnings. One Thursday morning, I came home from work early to grab some documents I'd forgotten, and that's when I saw a folded piece of paper stuck between the front door and the frame. At first, I thought it was another notice, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was labeled Notice of Eviction. According to this paper, we were being ordered to vacate the property within 30 days for failure to pay fines. It even had what looked like an official court seal on it. I panicked for a moment, not because I believed it, but because Jenna would be terrified if she saw it. I took it inside and sat at the kitchen table, reading it over carefully. Something didn't look right. The language was sloppy, almost like it had been copied from some legal template online. And then I saw it: the judge's signature was completely illegible, and there was no case number. My gut told me something was very wrong, so I called the county clerk's office. After waiting on hold for 20 minutes, I finally got through and asked if there was any eviction case filed against us. The clerk looked it up and told me there was no record of any filing under our names or address. That's when it hit me: this wasn't a real eviction notice. Someone had faked this. And I didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes to know who had done it. Karen. I was furious, my hands shaking as I crumpled the fake notice and threw it in the trash. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was illegal. When Jenna came home, I sat her down and showed her what I'd found, explaining what the clerk had said. She was pale, her hands gripping her coffee mug so tightly I thought it might crack. "She can't do this," Jenna said quietly. "This is our home." I nodded and told her I wasn't going to let Karen scare us into leaving. That night, I sat down at my computer and began documenting everything, every notice, every letter, every violation, every date and time Karen had come onto our property. I scanned the fake eviction notice before I threw it away. I knew we were going to need evidence. What Karen didn't know, what almost no one in the neighborhood knew, was that my mother-in-law, Judge Mary Collins, had recently been appointed to the county court. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, and she was fiercely protective of her family. I hadn't wanted to involve her because I didn't want to put Jenna in an awkward position, but this had crossed a line. When I called her that evening and explained everything, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Bring me everything you have tomorrow morning. If what you're saying is true, this isn't just an HOA dispute, this is fraud." I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying everything in my mind, thinking about how Karen had smiled smugly at the last HOA meeting, how she'd acted like she owned the entire neighborhood. She thought we were just another family she could bully into submission, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, I took the stack of documents and the scanned notice to my mother-in-law's office. She read through everything carefully, her expression growing darker with every page. Finally, she set the papers down and looked me in the eye. "You did the right thing coming to me," she said. "This is a criminal matter now. If she really faked court documents, she could be facing serious charges." Hearing that gave me a surge of relief, and a little bit of grim satisfaction. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we had the upper hand. Driving home from my mother-in-law's office that morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. For too long, Karen had been running the show, making our lives miserable one violation at a time, but now she had crossed a line into criminal territory, and there was no coming back from that. As I turned into the neighborhood, I caught sight of her in her yard, wearing her usual oversized sun hat and holding a clipboard, scribbling notes like some kind of self-appointed sheriff. For a split second, our eyes met, and she smiled, that smug, self-satisfied smile she always gave when she thought she had won. I smiled back this time, but not in defeat. This time it was different. This time I had something she didn't: proof. Over the next few days, I worked with Judge Collins to prepare everything we would need. She was careful not to directly take the case herself, conflict of interest and all that, but she promised me she would get it assigned to a fair judge if it went to a hearing. She also made a few calls to the county prosecutor's office, and that's when the ball really started rolling. They wanted sworn statements, so Jenna and I spent an entire evening writing everything down: every time Karen had trespassed, every violation notice, every meeting where she had cut me off or refused to hear my appeal. I attached photos of the treehouse she had called unauthorized, copies of the receipts proving our HOA dues had always been paid on time, and of course, the scanned fake eviction notice. The prosecutor's assistant called me personally the next day to say they were opening an investigation. I wish I could say things calmed down after that, but Karen must have sensed something was happening because her harassment suddenly got worse. She started walking past our house twice a day, glaring into our windows like she was waiting to catch us doing something wrong. I found another violation taped to the mailbox, this time claiming we had painted our shutters an unapproved shade of blue, which was ridiculous because they were the exact same color they'd been since we bought the house. When I saw her on the street later that day, I told her to stop coming onto my property without permission. She just laughed, saying, "It's all going to be over for you soon. You'll see." It was the first time I actually felt a chill run down my spine. Jenna tried to stay calm for Lila's sake, but I could tell the stress was eating her alive. Every time a car slowed down in front of the house, she would peek through the blinds like she was expecting someone to serve real eviction papers any moment. I knew we had to act fast before Karen pushed us completely over the edge. So, with the prosecutor's blessing, we filed for a temporary restraining order against Karen to stop her from coming onto our property or communicating with us directly. When the sheriff's deputy showed up at her door to serve the papers, I happened to be outside. I'll never forget the look on her face. She went from smug superiority to shocked outrage in a split second. She tried arguing with the deputy, saying she was just doing her job, but he handed her the paperwork and told her she had to comply. That weekend was the first peaceful one we'd had in months. No Karen lurking around, no new notices, no threats. Jenna and I even took Lila to the park and tried to pretend, just for one day, that we were a normal family again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. And sure enough, by Monday morning, we received an official notice in the mail, this time a real one, saying the HOA had scheduled a hearing to discuss termination of membership and lien enforcement against us. In other words, they were trying to take our house. I showed the letter to Judge Collins that night, and she raised an eyebrow. "This might actually work in your favor," she said. "If they try to enforce a lien based on fraudulent fines, that's going to blow up in their faces." She helped us draft a formal response demanding that the hearing be postponed until the county investigation into Karen's conduct was completed. When the HOA board ignored that and tried to hold the hearing anyway, we didn't show up, but we did send our attorney, a tough-as-nails woman named Rachel Perez who used to work as a district attorney. She walked into that meeting with a folder full of evidence and made it clear that if the board attempted to foreclose on our house, we would be filing a lawsuit for harassment, fraud, and emotional distress, not just against Karen, but against every board member personally. According to Rachel, the room went completely silent, and 2 of the board members actually walked out before the meeting ended. The investigation moved quickly after that. A county investigator came to our house to interview us and take copies of all the documents. I learned later that they also subpoenaed Karen's emails and HOA records. It didn't take long before they discovered what we already knew. Karen had created the fake eviction notice herself on her home computer, even downloading a forged seal she found online. She had also been altering HOA meeting minutes to make it look like the board had voted to impose fines on us when no such votes had ever taken place. It was worse than I thought. This wasn't just about us. Karen had been doing this to multiple families in the neighborhood, quietly bullying them into paying bogus fines or even selling their homes and moving away. When the prosecutor finally filed formal charges, forgery, fraud, and harassment, word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People started coming to me privately, thanking me for standing up to her. Some even handed me copies of their own violation notices, asking if I thought they had a case too. It was like a dam had broken. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one in control. Still, I knew the hardest part was yet to come, the court hearing. We were summoned to appear for an injunction hearing where a judge would decide whether Karen could remain president of the HOA during the criminal case. When Jenna and I walked into the courtroom, I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. And then, to my utter shock, I saw who was sitting at the bench, Judge Mary Collins. My mother-in-law. I hadn't expected her to preside over this hearing. I assumed she would recuse herself. But as soon as she saw me, she gave the faintest nod, a professional one, not a personal one, and then called the court to order. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon when she saw who the judge was. She immediately tried to object, claiming bias, but Judge Collins shut her down, stating that there was no conflict of interest since she was not related to the plaintiff directly and was capable of being impartial. Then she turned to Rachel and said, "Counselor, you may proceed." Watching my mother-in-law on the bench was like watching a lioness in action. Rachel laid out the entire case piece by piece, the forged eviction notice, the altered minutes, the pattern of harassment. Karen tried to interrupt several times, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but Judge Collins warned her to remain silent unless addressed. When it was her turn to speak, Karen's entire defense amounted to blaming me and Jenna, saying we were troublemakers who didn't respect the rules. That's when Rachel dropped the bombshell. the investigators report proving that Karen had fabricated evidence and abused her power as HOA president. By the end of the hearing, it wasn't even close. Judge Collins ruled in our favor, suspending Karen from the HOA board effective immediately and barring her from having any contact with us pending the outcome of the criminal trial. When the gavel came down, Jenna squeezed my hand so hard I thought my fingers might break, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, I felt like justice was finally within reach. But I knew Karen well enough to know that she wasn't done yet. If anything, being humiliated in court was only going to make her more dangerous. And as we walked out of the courthouse that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was far from over. The day after the hearing, I woke up to a strange, almost eerie quiet. No notes on the door. No Karen pacing up and down the street like a hawk hunting prey. It almost felt too good to be true, and as it turned out, it was. That afternoon, Jenna called me while I was at work, panic in her voice. "You need to come home. Right now." I didn't even ask why. I dropped everything and drove back as fast as I could, my heart pounding the entire way. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw what had made her so upset. Someone had spray-painted "Liars" in huge red letters across our garage door. Lila's toys were scattered across the lawn, as if someone had deliberately thrown them there. I felt my blood boil. We had just won a major victory in court, and now Karen, or someone acting on her behalf, was retaliating. Jenna was standing on the porch holding Lila, who was crying and asking why someone had drawn on her house. That broke me. I told Jenna to take her inside while I documented everything, photos of the vandalism, footprints in the grass leading away from the house, even a small trail of red paint droplets on the sidewalk. Then I called the police. An officer arrived within the hour and filed a report, promising to step up patrols in the area. But I could see in his face that he doubted they'd catch whoever did it unless we had a camera. That night, I went online and ordered the best security system I could find, motion sensors, night vision cameras, the works. I installed them the next day, covering every angle of the property. Jenna was shaken, but she supported me, telling me we couldn't back down now. If we let her scare us into silence, she wins, she said. She was right. Over the next few weeks, the cameras paid off. We caught Karen herself on video walking across our yard at midnight, peering into our windows with a flashlight. It was beyond creepy. I turned the footage over to the prosecutor, who added stalking to the list of charges against her. When the police served her with an arrest warrant, I stood at my window and watched as they led her away in handcuffs. The neighborhood was buzzing that morning. I saw curtains twitching, neighbors whispering to each other on the sidewalk. A few of them even came over later to quietly congratulate me. "It's about time someone stood up to her," one man said. "She's been terrorizing this place for years." But Karen wasn't the only problem. With her removed from the HOA board, the remaining members were in chaos. Some wanted to distance themselves from her entirely, others were scared we might sue them too. The board called an emergency meeting to elect a new president, and to everyone's shock, they nominated me. At first, I laughed. I didn't want the job. But Rachel, our attorney, pulled me aside and told me it might be the best way to protect our home and prevent this from happening again. After a long talk with Jenna, I agreed to step up, at least temporarily. Becoming HOA president was like stepping behind the curtain of a bad magic show. Suddenly I could see just how much Karen had been manipulating things. The finances were a mess, with thousands of dollars in legal fees that no one could account for. There were records of families being fined into foreclosure for absurd reasons, having the wrong kind of mailbox, planting unapproved flowers, even letting their kids draw chalk art on the sidewalk. I felt sick as I read through it all. It wasn't just about us. Karen had been running the neighborhood like a personal fiefdom, using fear and bureaucracy to get rid of anyone she didn't like. I called a special meeting and invited the entire neighborhood to attend. Standing at the front of the community center that night, I told everyone what I had discovered. I laid out the evidence of Karen's fraud, the fake eviction notices, the altered minutes, the missing funds. At first, there was stunned silence. Then, one by one, people began speaking up. A retired veteran told how Karen had fined him for putting up an American flag. A young couple shared that she had threatened to sue them for keeping chickens in their backyard, even though the HOA rules allowed it. By the end of the night, the room was buzzing with anger, not at me, but at Karen. For the first time, the neighborhood was united. But just when I thought we had finally turned the tide, Karen struck again, this time from the shadows. Someone hacked into the HOA's email system and sent out a mass message to all the homeowners, claiming that I was embezzling money from the HOA funds and that I had only gotten Karen arrested to cover up my own crimes. The lies were outrageous, but they were enough to stir up trouble. A few neighbors actually believed it and started posting angry comments in the neighborhood Facebook group. It felt like all the progress we had made was slipping away. I spent the next several days working with the IT department at my company to trace the source of the hack. Sure enough, they traced it back to Karen's IP address. Somehow, even while under investigation, she had gotten access to the HOA's email server and tried to frame me. This time, the prosecutor didn't waste any time. They charged her with cybercrimes on top of everything else. The judge raised her bail and ordered her to stay at least 500 feet away from me, Jenna, or Lila at all times. Even with Karen out of the picture physically, her shadow loomed large. Every day felt like a battle just to keep things running smoothly. Jenna was exhausted, Lila was having nightmares, and I was stretched thin between my job, my new role as HOA president, and preparing for the upcoming trial. There were moments when I thought about selling the house and leaving it all behind, but every time I looked at Lila playing in the backyard, I knew I couldn't let Karen win. This was our home. The prosecutor called me a week before the trial to go over my testimony. They were confident they had an airtight case, but they warned me that Karen's defense attorney was aggressive and would try to paint me as a vindictive neighbor. I didn't care. I had the truth on my side, and more importantly, I had Judge Collins overseeing the trial calendar. She wasn't the one hearing the case, but she made sure it was assigned to a judge with a reputation for zero tolerance on fraud. The night before the trial, I barely slept. Jenna sat with me at the kitchen table, going over our notes one last time. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "it's over. No more looking over our shoulders. No more fear." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't going to go down quietly. When we walked into the courthouse the next morning, my fears were confirmed. Karen was there, dressed in a sharp blazer, her hair perfectly styled, smiling like she was the victim in all this. She even had a small group of supporters sitting behind her, neighbors who still believed her lies. Seeing them made me angry, but also more determined than ever to win. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about sending a message to every bully who thought they could abuse their power without consequences. As we took our seats, the bailiff called the court to order. The trial was about to begin, and I knew that by the time it was over, one of us was going to be completely destroyed. The courtroom was packed the morning the trial began, a sea of tense faces and hushed whispers. It felt like the entire neighborhood had shown up to watch. Some were there to support us, others just to see the drama unfold, and a few still sat stiffly behind Karen, arms crossed, glaring at me as if I were the villain. I ignored them and focused on what mattered, clearing my family's name and making sure Karen never had the power to hurt anyone again. The prosecutor, a sharp, methodical man named Daniel Blake, started with his opening statement. He painted a picture of a neighborhood under siege by a corrupt HOA president who had abused her position to intimidate and defraud residents. He held up a copy of the fake eviction notice, enlarged on a poster board, and let the jury take it in. "This document," he said, his voice cutting through the room, "was not issued by any court in this state. It was created by the defendant, Karen Wright, in an attempt to force my clients from their home illegally." The room went completely silent. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as if to get a better look. Karen's attorney, a slick-talking man named Frederick Hall, gave his opening next. He tried to spin the narrative, claiming Karen had only been enforcing the rules fairly and that I was leading a personal vendetta against her after racking up legitimate fines. He suggested the vandalism and midnight prowling were the work of unknown troublemakers, not Karen. My client is the real victim here, he declared dramatically, targeted by a conspiracy to remove her from power. I nearly laughed out loud. A conspiracy? If only he knew how many sleepless nights Jenna and I had endured because of his victim. The prosecutor called me as the first witness. Walking to the stand, I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me, but when I sat down and took the oath, all that fear turned into focus. I told the story from the beginning, the petty violations, the bogus fines, the fake eviction notice. I explained how I'd called the clerk's office, discovered there was no case, and saved the document as evidence. When Daniel showed the jury the video footage from our security cameras, Karen creeping around our property in the dead of night with a flashlight, I heard gasps ripple through the courtroom. Frederick tried to trip me up during cross-examination, asking if I had ever broken any HOA rules. Of course, I said plainly. I left my trash can out overnight once, and I got a warning. But I paid every fine that was legitimately owed. What I didn't do was bow down to illegal demands or fake court papers. He pressed harder, accusing me of running for HOA president out of revenge. No, I said firmly, locking eyes with the jury. I ran because someone had to clean up the mess she left behind. Someone had to make sure this never happened to another family. The next witnesses were our neighbors, and this was where things really began to unravel for Karen. One after another, they took the stand and testified about how she had harassed them too. A single mother broke down crying as she described how Karen had threatened to have her children removed by child services because they played outside too loudly. An elderly couple revealed that they had been fined $500 for planting tomatoes in their backyard, which the HOA rules actually permitted. Each testimony chipped away at Karen's credibility until even some of her supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then came the bombshell. The county investigator took the stand and testified about the forensic analysis of Karen's computer. He explained how they recovered the original Word document used to create the fake eviction notice, complete with metadata showing Karen's name and the exact time it was saved. He also showed emails where she bragged to another board member about teaching those troublemakers a lesson. At that point, I saw Karen's face go pale. When it was Karen's turn to testify, she walked to the stand with forced confidence, chin held high. Her attorney tried to guide her through soft questions, painting her as a misunderstood leader who only wanted what was best for the community. But under cross-examination, Daniel tore through her defense like tissue paper. He confronted her with the computer evidence, the altered meeting minutes, the stalking footage. She stammered, denied, deflected, but the more she talked, the more it sounded like excuses. When Daniel asked her point-blank if she had forged the eviction notice, she hesitated just a fraction too long before saying no. I could see the jury noticing it too. The tension in the courtroom was electric. At one point, Karen lost her temper completely, shouting that I was destroying her life, and that the entire neighborhood would regret turning on her. The judge banged his gavel and warned her to control herself, but the damage was done. She had just shown the jury exactly who she really was. After a week of testimony, closing arguments were made. Daniel's was powerful, almost poetic. This case is not just about one family, he told the jury. It's about a community terrorized by one person who thought she was above the law. Today, you have the power to say enough is enough. Frederick's closing was passionate but hollow. He repeated the claim that Karen was being targeted unfairly, but by now, even some of her staunchest supporters looked unconvinced. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts, forgery, fraud, harassment, and cybercrime. Karen's face was a mask of rage as the judge read the sentence: 2 years in county jail, restitution of all stolen funds, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. She tried to shout something as the bailiff led her away, but no one paid her any attention. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Jenna squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. Around us, neighbors were whispering, nodding, even smiling. We had done it. We had stood up to the bully and won. But even as we walked out of that courtroom victorious, I knew this wasn't just the end of a fight, it was the start of something new. Our neighborhood would never be the same again. And now, it was up to me to rebuild it. When the gavel fell for the last time and Karen was led away in handcuffs, it felt like a storm that had hovered over our family for nearly a year had finally broken. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air was crisp, and for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Jenna stood beside me, her fingers laced through mine, tears still glistening in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of fear or exhaustion. They were tears of relief. Our neighbors gathered around us on the courthouse steps, some patting me on the back, others hugging Jenna. It wasn't just our victory, it was theirs too. That night, we hosted a small gathering at our house. I grilled steaks, Jenna baked her famous apple pie, and Lila ran barefoot through the backyard laughing, as if she had forgotten all about the nightmares that had kept her awake just weeks before. For the first time, I saw our neighbors smiling, really smiling, instead of glancing nervously down the street, wondering what new rule might ruin their week. One by one, they shared their own stories of how Karen had made their lives miserable, and how grateful they were that someone had finally taken her down. "You didn't just save your house," one man told me. "You saved this whole neighborhood." In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to something like normal, though normal was different now. As HOA president, I made it my mission to turn the organization into something that actually served the residents instead of terrorizing them. We held open meetings where everyone had a chance to speak without being shut down. We rewrote the bylaws, getting rid of the ridiculous, punitive rules that had given Karen so much power. We hired a professional property manager to keep everything transparent, and we opened the books for everyone to see. The change was almost immediate. People started planting flowers again, kids chalked hopscotch on the sidewalks, neighbors who had been avoiding each other started chatting over fences again. Jenna flourished too. For months, she had been tense and quiet, always looking over her shoulder, but now she seemed lighter. She volunteered to head up the neighborhood block party committee, and soon we had our first real community event in years, a barbecue in the park with games for the kids and music that went on late into the night. I stood there with a plate of food in my hand, watching Lila chase fireflies with the other kids, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. But the biggest change happened inside me. This whole ordeal had tested me in ways I never imagined. I had gone from being a man who just wanted to keep his head down and live in peace to someone who had stood up and fought back, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. I had faced down a bully, taken her to court, and won. And in doing so, I had found a strength I didn't know I had. Karen, meanwhile, faded from our lives like a bad dream. We heard that she tried to appeal her sentence, but the appeals court upheld it. Last I heard, she was serving her time quietly, though a part of me doubted she had truly changed. People like her rarely do. But it no longer mattered. She couldn't hurt us anymore. Months later, as winter turned to spring, I walked out into the front yard one morning and saw Lila drawing with chalk on the driveway, a giant, crooked heart with stick figures inside. "That's us, Daddy," she said proudly. I crouched down next to her, my chest tightening. That heart meant more than just a doodle. It meant that our home was ours again. Safe. Whole. That night, I sat on the porch with Jenna, the stars bright overhead. "You know," I said quietly, "if Karen hadn't pushed us this far, I never would have gotten involved with the HOA. I never would have known how bad it really was." Jenna nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "Sometimes it takes a storm," she said, "to see how strong your house really is." She was right. We had been through hell, vandalism, harassment, fear, but we had come out the other side stronger. Our marriage was stronger, our neighborhood was stronger, and even though I never asked for this fight, I was glad I had taken it on. I realized then that this story wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from us, our dignity, our peace, our home. As the months rolled on, I eventually stepped down as HOA president. I didn't want to make a career out of running the neighborhood, I just wanted to set things right. We held an election, and the community voted in a new president who shared the same vision of fairness and transparency. I stayed on as a board member, just to keep an eye on things, but now it was a shared responsibility, not a battlefield. The last time I thought about Karen was the day we repainted the garage door. It had taken me a while to get around to it, partly because I wanted to leave those ugly red spray-painted letters as a reminder of what we'd survived. But one Saturday morning, Jenna handed me a paintbrush and said it was time. As the fresh white paint covered the last traces of that word, liars, I felt like we were closing the final chapter on that dark time. When I stepped back to look at the finished job, I saw my reflection in the smooth white surface and realized that the man staring back at me wasn't the same man who had stood there a year ago, holding a fake eviction notice with shaking hands. He was someone stronger, steadier, someone who had fought for his family and won. I turned to see Jenna and Lila watching me from the porch, smiling. And in that moment, I knew, no matter what came next, no HOA president, no bully, no forged piece of paper would ever take this from us again. We had taken back our home. We had taken back our lives. And that, more than any verdict or sentence, was the real victory.